Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I am so thrilled to be back in Vancouver to celebrate XDS 10th anniversary. I'm always amazed to see how much external dev has grown over the last decade and how it became an essential part of game development. For his vision, passion, and dedication, but also for always keeping in mind the importance of developing the community and building those relationships, I want to start by giving a big shout out to Chris Wren and his team for making XDS an incredible achievement year after year. Congrats, Chris. So, my name is Isabelle Bismuth from Ubisoft Montreal, and I'm the Director of Partnership on the Assassin's Creed brand. As a proud member of the XDS Advisory Committee, I had the chance this year to work to peer review Dave's upcoming talk, Hard Pivot, Changing XDev Strategies Post-Acquisition. As mergers and acquisition have become a daily alert in our inbox, Dave's presentation highlights how M&As impact external dev and how those circumstances often leads us to revisit our strategies and how to adapt to the company's new goals, and how to navigate these changes with our external partners. And now, without further ado, please help me welcome on stage Mr. Dave Sanderson from Phoenix Labs.
I'm Dave Sanderson. I am the Senior External Development Manager at Phoenix Labs. And before I get started, just a couple of things. First, I wanted to make some acknowledgments. First, to Isabelle and to Chris Wren for their invaluable support in making this talk happen and this conference happen. To Tori Matheson, to Glenn Barnes, to Jean-Marie Owens, and to Linz Williamson-Christie for their contributions to this deck, and to Mike Reed, to Lauren Lee, and Phil Yee, the other members of the external development team at Phoenix Labs. So, hard pivot, post-acquisition strategy changes. The reason why I wanted to give this talk is that M&As are all over the news. It's a very hot-button topic in our industry. But it feels like within all of that noise, there isn't actually a whole lot of signal about what is actually happening inside the studio. And I wanted to change that. So I wanted to kind of arm people here with some information about how they can interpret an M&A when they see it in the news, and perhaps also guide some decision-making if they themselves are going through it, or perhaps if their clients are going through it. One last thing, I wanted to really make sure that this is a talk that is useful to folks. So my hope here is that there's going to be some Q&A at the end of it, and we can kind of get into some gory details. So with that said, let's get started. So I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, could be significantly less. As you may notice, I speak quite quickly. I am relying on my colleagues in the front row to yell at me if it gets so fast that you can't understand what I'm saying. But I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the story of Phoenix Labs and how we got to acquisition, what meaningfully changed afterward and how our goals changed, and then really how we think about a new strategy to reflect those new goals and kind of the first principles of how to think about XDev strategy, a little bit of time on what bad looks like, what not to do, and then finally kind of get into some gritty details about how we actually went through the pivot. So starting out, road to acquisition. Where did this talk come from? Well, this talk actually begins before I joined Phoenix Labs. I actually got to know the folks at Phoenix Labs as a service provider before joining the team to help run outsourcing. And so there is Phoenix Labs not long after I joined. If you actually look on the bottom right there, that's me kneeling down. When I joined Phoenix Labs, there were about 70 people. This is just shortly after Dauntless launched. We have one flagship title right now, Dauntless. It's a action RPG co-op game, cross-play, cross-platform. Came out a couple of years ago. And it's on Nintendo Switch and PlayStation and Xbox and PC. And it did very well for us. It was a very successful launch. And this was a huge achievement for a small team, which was really one of the things that was a founding idea for Phoenix Labs. Two core thoughts. The first is that a small, highly effective team can do the work of many more. In its original conception, Phoenix Labs was never supposed to be more than 30 people. We just passed 300, so kind of failed pretty hard on that front. But when we started so small, that actually assumes an enormous amount of reliance on external partners. So when you think about how Phoenix Labs operates, outsourcing was always a big part of how we were going to come together. A second piece that really matters here is that Phoenix Labs was founded by people who wanted to have a company where they could retire. And they wanted to build a company where people could come and do the best work of their careers, and if they so choose, to retire there. And what that means is that stability was hugely prioritized. We wanted to be a highly employee-focused business. And so one of the ways that you can deliver on stability and flexibility and being highly effective as a small team is external development. So when I arrived, when I arrived, there was no formal strategy around outsourcing. We were pretty good at it. A guy named Glenn Barnes was already running it. A guy named Nick Clifford, not so much so, which he will appreciate in the recording of this, I'm sure. But one of the things when I came to Phoenix Labs was codifying our external development strategy. So there's a few things here. First of all, we're trying to build a AAA quality free-to-play MMO with a small team. We have very high quality goals for our products. Second is to really allow folks to focus on their best work by outsourcing some repetitive or less desirable tasks. If we want to be world-class in something, build it internally. If we can't, find out who is and work with them. And finally, to prioritize long-term relationships. So if you read between the lines here, you can actually see how this strategy speaks to the business realities of how Phoenix Labs operated as a young company. For example, we were really conscious about headcount, making sure to grow at a very measured pace and really invest in our company culture and protect our recruiting process to make sure the kinds of folks that are joining the team are folks that we'd want to be joining the team. We were very employee focused. You can see here that one of the ways that we can use external development is to help folks really do the work that they care about and building a company where people can find a home. And finally, you can see that quality and stability are top priorities. And this strategy served us really well. One of the ways you can tell this strategy served us well is that in 2020, this happened. Phoenix Labs was acquired by a company called Garena. And Garena is a Southeast Asian-based gaming division of a much larger Singapore-based technology company called C Group. And I would be surprised if many more than a handful of people have heard of Garena in this room, which is an interesting surprise because they support 600 million active players. They are an enormous company with enormous achievement, most notably a game called Free Fire. It was the most downloaded game on the App Store this year and last year and the year before that. And they share our company values in a very deep way. They are incredibly player-focused, they're incredibly employee-focused, and they're a great team. They're actually one of the earliest investors in Phoenix Labs. So this was not the case of some other company coming from overseas. These were people that we knew and that really believed in us from the beginning. And so this was really an evolution of a partnership. From a more strategic perspective, Garena is extremely strong on the mobile side and have deep expertise in developing markets in Asia, whereas Phoenix Labs is much more console and PC-based AAA developers with a lot of expertise in North America and Europe. So you can see sort of a natural synergy between those two things, that we filled a real kind of expertise gap, and we were a strong investment as Garena sought to bring games to more people around the world. So why does this matter for XDev and why does this matter for this talk? Well, that strategy that I just showed you didn't serve us so well anymore. And why that's the case is kind of the meat of this talk. But I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here and show you what our XDev strategy ultimately wound up being after a review process, and then we're going to talk about why we got to the place that we got to. So post-acquisition, our strategy ultimately looked like this. So this is all about our team readying for scale. We're supporting and accelerating the development of a slate of AAA games, still allowing people to focus on the work that helps the company grow and makes our business better. We wanted to scale our network of partnerships, but also leverage C Group and Garena where appropriate to do so, and build a pipeline to help manage our vendors. So at first glance, this doesn't look that different. We're making a slate of games instead of a single game. We want to help folks focus and grow while also improving our business. We want to leverage the benefits of being a large multinational company, and we wanted to build a scalable system for partners. So no big deal, nothing controversial there. Except this strategy, as written here, represents a sea change in how we operated as a business, not just external development, but for legal, for operations, for finance, for basically any discipline that can be outsourced. This led our team to slash our external development budget, terminate contracts with some of our longest-term partners, and it also led me to grow my team from 1 to 4 people, and how all of that came to be is what I'd like to tell you about. But why? Why did we make these decisions? And why does something that seems fairly minor on paper actually show up in the world as a really dramatic shift? So I want to talk about sort of the new reality and what became true at Phoenix Labs as a result of becoming part of Garena, and really that shift in importance. And the thing to take away from this section is that like when a company's goals change, external development has to change along with it, and to understand those goals, it's critical that you come to understand what your company is trying to achieve. So, how we work with external teams needed to change. First of those is that we were no longer a small and independent studio. Phoenix Labs was originally a tiny business based in Vancouver that was venture capital backed. We eventually had a team in San Francisco, but still, we were still from any reasonable scale of people attending this conference, we were a small company with big ambitions. But this is the thing. Now we were part of a business where we were an investment. We were a place of expertise where another company had come to us and said, you are the experts in console development, you are the experts in Western markets, help us grow, and do what you wanted to do. Do what you wanted to do all along. But instead of going from one game and starting to think about the second game, what if you could grab hold of any of your dreams right now? What would you do if you could? And I need to really stress this. The new scale was really more about new opportunities. And it was incredible for us because not only is this about a matter of we now have money to do more things, this was a group of people who believed in us, who wanted to say, what is it you think you should do? How can we empower you to do it? This is an incredibly high trust partnership, and we're just absolutely thrilled to do it. And I will say, in the years that we've been working with people from Garena, they are nothing but lovely folks, and we're delighted with this partnership. And then also it meant that I really wanted to do a good job when it came to revisiting our XDev strategy. These are people that I trusted and wanted to deliver for. And finally, this is a really important part. Acknowledging that where we came from and our future were going to be different places. This is not about sort of calcifying what you did before. This is much more about looking at the future and being willing to drop what maybe you're used to in favor of things that unlock your growth. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? So here's that original strategy again. And I want to dig into two things in particular to kind of dial in what I'm talking about. The first of these, let's focus on building a AAA quality MMO with the smallest team possible. Well, that's not true anymore, right? So smallest team possible here is super meaningful. A small team is what allows us to be lean and efficient, which is especially important in a venture capital-backed space. But it also tells you a lot about how we work with partners. If you're a tiny team with a big game, you have to rely on your external partners to take on big, meaningful chunks of your work. You have to assume that there's things that you cannot do, and you have to trust other people are going to get it done. That tells you a lot about our due diligence process, and it also tells you about the kinds of relationships we wanted to foster, which is also why you see we care about long-term relationships. Also, the second one, if you can't be world-class in something internally, find out who is and do it with them externally. Well, what if we could be world-class in something internally that we aren't currently? How do you decide what to invest in? How do you decide what are the right things to pour a lot of money and time and effort into so that you do become world-class? And what are the things that should stay with external development? What's the framework where you make those kinds of decisions? And so how we work with external development teams needed to change. And why exactly is that changing? Well, a few things. One, what counts as tolerable risk had changed. It's really important to remember that external development is a really powerful way to manage risk inside a company, whether that's sort of production risk in terms of your ability to create a certain number of assets within a certain time frame. It also relates to business risk, where like the cost of development is spread across more teams, and you've got more people have kind of skin in the game, and you can do things like not grow too fast, right? It's a way to control risk. Also, our ability to invest in ourselves had meaningfully changed. Before, in Phoenix Labs' history, every dollar that we spent was money that came from venture capital. We had to go ask investors for it, and every time we ran out of that money, we had to go raise another series. And those are non-trivial things to do. They're hugely time-consuming, and they also put you one more step away from becoming a profitable business yourself. Now, there's lots of good reasons to do it, but it is a thing that you have to keep in mind. And finally, our scale and our ambitions had changed. We suddenly had access to people with expertise that we had no knowledge of before who were ready to help us. So this is both from a technology standpoint inside C Group, this is from a publishing standpoint inside Garena, and this also meant that like, if you wanted to build a slate of games, how would you go about doing it? You have the money. What are you going to go do with it? How do you make those decisions? So our external development strategy had to change. And that just leaves one question. One question. Go for it. That one. What now? What comes next? So this put me in a position where I had to think about the way to solve external development problems. If I'm going to decide what is a good thing to do with our new strategy, I got to understand what kinds of problems external development is good at solving. If I know what's important to my business, I also need to know what my tools are good for. So from my perspective, external development is good for 4 main things. This makes it look nice and neat and tidy. It's not. It's messy and gray. But this is a useful framework to go through it. The first of these is expertise. This is all about accessing skilled talent. By and large, you would think about something like maybe a very specific engineering expertise, or perhaps an elite level concept artist who's somewhere in the world. So you're getting access to something that you wouldn't otherwise have internally. It's also really worth noting that ExDev is a great way to access global perspectives. If you're trying to build a product that's appealing to a global audience and you want to build more diverse perspectives, more diverse backgrounds into your development process, external development is a great way to do it. Next is flexibility. So the needs of a game developer fluctuate pretty dramatically sometimes, and external development is a great way to manage that fluctuation. Our needs can also often be very spiky, and so outsourcing, good way to manage that. Finally, cost. Some services are just prohibitively expensive to maintain internally. Good example of that would be very few developers in the world need to maintain a trailer team internally. It does exist. But if you're trying to make photoreal trailers, it's almost always better to go outside the studio, or something like localization, teams that is prohibitively expensive to maintain. And it's also worth noting that this buckets a return on investment as well. Like, there are some markets where if you go there, you can get great work, and you can compare India to Malaysia to South Africa to the United States, and you can judge between them, and you can manage your return on investment. And finally, focus. This is actually the big one. External development is a really powerful tool to free up developers' time. If you're able to outsource costs so they can focus on the thing that they are very best at, that is the most powerful thing that you can allow a developer to do, which is really important to know for people who are service providers here selling your services. If you are able to allow developers to focus better on the things they care about, that is where most of the value is coming from in what you do. It's not because you make a widget, it's because you allow them to do other problems. So let's talk a little bit about investment and risk, especially post-acquisition, because this is really what we're talking about after Garena shows up and they're ready to invest in the company. We have to start thinking about where ExDev risk exists. So the first of these is Garena invested in Phoenix Labs, not other businesses. And it's really important for folks when they're looking at news around mergers and acquisition, that what you're seeing happen is one business bring essentially a giant pile of money to another business and say, grow or achieve a certain goal. And any time that you're then working with service providers, you're effectively representing a choice to not spend that money inside your company, a choice to spend that money outside your company. So this is the thing we're talking about here. To invest in things that are not us building, our studio, our expertise, or our scale, that's a meaningful choice. And it's a choice that we're rightly questioned on from the people that are acquiring us. And finally, the most important thing we could do with Garena's resources was invest in Phoenix Labs. And this is actually the thing that governs most of the external development strategy that you saw a few moments ago with our sort of ready for scale technology, or ready for scale strategy rather, is we are trying to make sure that we are doing the most with Garena's resources to invest inside our company. So this strategy and this acquisition is really a dividing line. The moment that Garena acquired Phoenix Labs is the end of one story and the beginning of another. In the past, Phoenix Labs was a venture capital-backed independent studio with significant pressure to maintain a small internal headcount while still aiming high in our product goals. Post-acquisition, we had the resources to invest in ourselves, and we could and should scale our ambitions to match. So this is the thing we arrived at. External development should support and accelerate growth at Phoenix Labs, not replace it. And all right, so we got a pretty clear idea of our goals, what the company wants to do. We got a pretty clear idea of what kinds of problems external development is good at solving. But we should also think a little bit about what kinds of things external development is bad at solving. What should we not do with external development? And so these were the three big buckets that we came together with of things that we would not want to spend money on in external development. And this is going to be controversial, and it should be controversial because it was controversial when we talked about it, and it's still controversial now. But the three big pieces are core design, strategic technology, and staffing shortages. So again, remember, outsourcing core work and headcount is effectively investing in other businesses, not Phoenix Labs. And also, please note, these are guidelines, not rules. And when we choose to make exceptions, the exceptions do exist, but they should always be treated exactly as that, exceptions. Choices that you are consciously choosing to deviate from a strategy, and that's based on due diligence, risk assessment, talking with your internal stakeholders, and everybody is aware that you are choosing to deviate from that strategy. Also, super clear that you are, it's important to communicate with your stakeholders that exceptions are exactly that. They're exceptions, not precedents. And exceptions can sure look like precedents if you're not being real clear about it. So let's talk about core design for a second. This is all about the product choices that we make. And we are, at core, a game development company. The games we make that is the thing that our business is for. And it is the core of our promise to our players, is that when you play a Phoenix Labs game, it's designed by people at Phoenix Labs. And that's really the thing that we never want to compromise on. From an XDev perspective, this means that things like full SKU development is unlikely something we'd be interested in. We are much more interested in things that will support and accelerate growth, not replace it. Strategic tech, so this is the kinds of technology that we develop that are going to give us a competitive advantage in the market. These are the kinds of things that we build into our games that will carry forward into further games. These are the things that we are the technology that helps us advance. It's super important to realize that middleware is an inherently risky thing. Doesn't mean we don't use it. We use lots of middleware. But every time that we do, it has a very high threshold of due diligence. The thing to note is, like, if we lose control of our products, our ability to serve our products to our players, that is like an existential risk to our company. So we have to be extremely confident that the technology that goes into our games is always going to be reliable. So we're extra sensitive to this one. I'm not sure how many folks are familiar with Akinema. It was an animation solving middleware piece that we used on Dauntless. And we were really careful in our contracting. We had a provision in the contract that if Akinema ever went out of business, we had access to source code. So we were totally covered. We had high confidence in the business, but in case they folded, we would be fine. Except we didn't account for mergers and acquisitions. So one day, Akinema was acquired, and they just stopped answering our calls. They didn't go out of business. They didn't stop supporting. They just went quiet. And out of nowhere, in a live service game, we had to rip that technology out and put something else back in. And that has left a lasting mark on the way that we think about risk inside the studio. So just keep in mind, if you are a middleware developer, realize that this is actually, it's not a trivial thing to incorporate another company's software into your products. And finally, staffing shortages. This is the big one for us, and it's really the big one for this conference. A huge number of people here their whole job is to supply excellent developers, excellent artists, excellent engineers to support other teams. And there is a real conflict potential between product goals and staffing shortages. So here's the thing. Garena invests in Phoenix Labs. We want to grow. We've been told to grow. However, we also want to protect the culture of our company. We want to make sure that we are being smart about our recruiting, and we're smart about hiring the right kinds of folks. And so that creates a tension where the needs of the products, we are growing teams, we have growing business. We're not just making one game, we're making a whole slate of games. We got some really smart people who want to go fast, they want to make things, they want to make the games. At the same time, there's a recruiting team who's saying, slow down, slow down, slow down. We can't hire people fast enough. And so all of a sudden, you got a state where the game has needs, the product development team has needs, the recruiting team cannot possibly keep up in terms of supplying the kinds of folks we want to have at the company. And all of a sudden, that seems like an ideal time to outsource. That seems like the perfect time to go to an external team. Except supplanting headcount externally has its own inherent risks. That is the definition of investing into another company instead of our own, because it creates challenges that are actually not always easy to see. There are communication risks, there are team risks, there are sort of semi-invisible things like if you have a hole in your staffing and there's an external partner that's perfect for it, if you are too fast to go outsource that, maybe you're going to miss that as a growth opportunity for somebody inside the company. And if you're a studio that's heavily focused on growing people in their career, heavily focused on giving people a place to grow and a place where they want to work long term, you have to be more focused on giving them opportunities than you are to jump to fill it with somebody who's available outside the studio. There's also legal risks, particularly in Canada. If you treat an external contractor like they're a member of your team, very quickly you owe them vacation, you owe them benefits, because quite rightly, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck by Canadian law. So we gotta be really careful of things like that. Anyway, I'm more than happy to dig into this one, but this was a long-standing and challenging concern for us. So, with all of that context, now that we know like what the goals were for our company post-acquisition, once we have a good idea of what kinds of problems XDev is good at solving, have a good sense of what kinds of problems XDev is not good at solving for us, what did this actually look like? And so, pivot in action. This had sort of 4 broad phases in terms of each of our relationships. The first was a bit of a risk review. The second was about updating and terminating contracts. Third, offboarding and relationship management. And finally, internal re-education and transition support. Again, this makes it look really neat and tidy. It's not. It's murky and gray, and this was not a linear pipeline. This was not like each of these things happened in perfect sync, but it is the way that I reflect on the kinds of changes that we are making to our external development contracts. First of all, risk review. So again, we had talked about how our tolerance for risk had changed. Not only in terms of headcount, but also the risks didn't disappear. It's not as though pre-acquisition we had tons of risk and post-acquisition we had none. It's the risks themselves changed. The risk we now had was failing to scale, failing to deliver on a slate of projects where it's like our goal is now to develop a slate of genre-defining AAA products. The risk there is failing to take the steps to take us there, not the risk of, oh my goodness, what happens if we run out of money? Really, we had to then review all of our current XDev practices through the lens of the kinds of things we're talking about here. Does it support and accelerate growth, or does it undermine it? Then we're talking about, after we've done that risk review, we got to update or terminate contracts. The first piece of this would be triage. You have to look at everything you're doing and what are the most important pieces to update and what can stay for a month or even a year. What is the most critical pieces to pay attention to? What's working fine? What needs attention? Also, this is really about honoring the spirit of your contracts, not necessarily the letter of them, because this is a really rough thing to do, to update. Update's the nice way, terminate's the ugly one. In our contracts, I suspect are broadly similar to other folks in this room, where we had net 30 days. We could go to any partner we have and with 1 month notice say goodbye. We did not do that even once. There is not a single outsourced relationship that we ended, and we ended a few, on that basis. For example, we had a long-term animation partner that are phenomenal team. I'm perfectly happy to name them. It's a group called Steamroller, primarily out of Florida, among the best animators that you will ever work with. And I got on a very difficult call with the CEO of that company, and we gave them 5 months of notice. And not only is it about saying, here's an extra chunk of notice, and this is how you can get your house in order, it was me walking him through the thought process. Why are we making this decision? Why is it important to our business? And the end result of that is we are actually much closer at the end of it than we are right now. So it kind of feeds into this next piece, which is transparency really strengthens relationships and uncertainty undermines them. How you handle offboarding is enormously important, not just in terms of being a decent person, although that's a big part of it, but also we are an incredibly tiny community of developers. If there's anything that you'll notice at XDS, everybody knows everybody within a couple of years of coming here. Your reputation matters, and treating other people like decent human beings is not just good sense, it's just good business as well. So the final piece of this, and this is the kind of thing that's ongoing, this is a big piece of what me and my team are doing, is essentially re-educating how your teams think about outsourcing, and then really helping them to transition to new solutions. So again, start with why. Explain to them why these decisions are being made. And in doing so, you can transform people into allies. You can get them on board and help you pivot a strategy rather than resist that pivot. And they have an incentive to resist. You know, just because you want to change the way you outsource things doesn't mean the problems that they are trying to solve go away. This also tells you a lot about how you want to do that triaging process. Is if you want to move, say, your entire animation team from outside the studio to inside the studio, you sure as hell better have a plan for how you're going to ramp up the internal folks and ramp down the external folks. This is not the kind of thing that you want to do without a plan. It's not the kind of thing you don't want to do independently. And it's worth folks noting here, particularly for people who work with other developers, XDev people have much higher context into what's going on inside the business than the dev teams do. Almost always, they are heavily focused on making great games, because that's their job. And when we talk to the product managers and the game directors and the art directors, their job is to advocate for their product. They should care more about making their game and protecting their team over your position of like representing a corporate interest. But if you can understand what kind of problems you're good at solving, what the corporate goals are, and what you're trying to achieve, and explain it in a way that's articulate, you can bring those people on board, and now you have advocates to help you pivot a strategy instead of people that are going to be resisting it. So, thing to remember, there's no such thing as good outsourcing. There's no such thing as good external development. There's only good for us at this time. Why does it matter? Well, for XDev folks, your ability to supply good solutions for your team requires you to have good context on the wider business. And why does this matter for service providers? Well, your ability to sell services is limited by your ability to understand the dev team's needs. To put this another way, this is not just about, the dev team needs thing X and you make thing X. It's about if you supply thing X, then that dev team can then go do something else. A simpler way of putting that perhaps would be, I get why me buying things from you is good for you. Why is me buying things from you good for me? And then finally, I want to talk about how did this all work out for Phoenix Labs? Well, north of 300 of us. In the last 2 years, we've opened studios in Montreal and Los Angeles and grown the team in Vancouver and San Francisco. We have taken on responsibilities for publishing Free Fire and other Garena games in North America and Western Europe. And we have north of 300 people. And I will also say this. We have more external partners than ever before. We have virtually tripled our outsourced budget in the short term, and that will go north very, very quickly from that. From today to the next few years, we'll be doing more external development work with more partners than we ever could have if we had stayed as a company before, as an independent company. So from my perspective, this acquisition was not only hugely successful for us as Phoenix Labs as a company, it's also been a huge success from an external development standpoint, and I'm thrilled to be working with so many people who are here today. And from my perspective, this is what a successful acquisition looks like. In conclusion, take the time to understand your company's goals. Really understand what your team's trying to do, because this is the thing that's going to let you make a good external development strategy. Be very clear about how your XDev team can advance those goals or undermine them. Be very conscious that just because it was working before doesn't mean it's going to keep working. Be as transparent as possible in your communications, both internally and externally. And finally, be kind. We're all in this together. Be good to each other. Thanks a lot. I'd love to take your questions.
You must be all familiar by now with this catch-up microphone that you need to speak into. So if anybody has a question for Dave, thank you again for the presentation. It's the time.
Crushed it.
No?
Not a single question.
You got one? Otherwise, we would have... Oops, sorry.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. When you're talking about not using external development for increasing staffing. And you're familiar with my old company, so it's like,
Yep.
so, like, I wonder where we fit in that regard. Like, we were asked by studios, major studios, to do work that was high risk, as in, like, they don't know if they wanted to move in this space, in the mobile social space for bridges, and they didn't want to put their core team on it. They definitely had the skills to do it, more than probably our company did, but they wanted to use us to explore an area without fully committing, and then of course they wound up, years later taking it all in-house. What would, like, in your model, like, I'm just curious, like, where that fits.
So I would say, I think it fits quite well, actually, because in that case, you're not actually hiring a team like Work at Play to do things that you are already planning to hire for. I think the situation for us has been, Phoenix Labs' history was so ready to outsource things, we were so eager to work with external partners, that we tended to pull that lever really, really fast. And that stance, that mindset, actually worked against the plan of, like, slow down and hire for that role. Like, is this a job that's going to be here for years on end? Then we should hire for it. We should, so as long as that's a thing that the company is committed to, it's worth hiring for. What you're describing sounds like something the company is not committed to, in which case, sure, like, they're as a company, we want to make sure people have a job for the rest of their careers. If this is like maybe a 6-month gig, we would never hire for that. That's a perfect time for us to use outsourcing. But in that case, that's not staff, that's not replacing headcount. That is, essentially risk management. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Wondering where's the box?
Take out the box.
The box. If somebody we're tracking it. Yeah. So I was just wondering, anybody has another questions for Dave? I know it's running late. It's the last session. Okay, you're gonna make it hard for me.
Go for it. Big one. I believe in you.
Okay.
Nice.
Whoa.
Very well done.
Hi. You said that when Garena acquired Phoenix Labs, they have like a culture match. And I wonder if you've been looking at, in your source partners you work with, to be as much cultural match as yours.
That's a great question. So the short answer is yes. The longer answer is we can't be responsible for other teams' culture, which doesn't mean we shouldn't care. We do very deeply. We want to work with great people, but I think it is. Okay, I'm going to borrow a phrase from a fellow named Sean Bender that we work with, and he often says you need to honor the reality of the situation, and it is not always possible for us to do the level of due diligence where we understand what it's like to work for a company. So it absolutely is on us to do the due diligence, find out, like, are these decent human beings? Are these people funding terrorism, which is actually part of what we do now, by the way, because we have a level of compliance within a publicly traded company. So there is due diligence, but cultural due diligence is really difficult because that's actually an employee experience. And it's pretty rare that you're able to, like, spend a good chunk of time with the individual artists working on the project, as opposed to perhaps the more like the salespeople and the dev folks. So I think we are obligated to change positions if we encounter something negative. Like, there is due diligence on the front end, and we are absolutely obligated to, like, if we discover that there's something not great about the culture of the company we're working with, to change. But I think it's disingenuous to say we're only ever going to work with people that have a great cultural fit. Cultures are different, and I don't want to. I think it's important to be honest about that. I would rather work with teams that are very culturally aligned with us. Every time, I'd rather do it. I would be lying if I said that is a hurdle of due diligence that we do every single time. It's just not. There's been some very good talks at this conference about how to be better about that. I think you can be smart about the the kinds of markers that you're looking for. So for example, diversity in the leadership team is a great one, is something that we would look for. Making sure that there are different kinds of folks from different kinds of backgrounds within those teams, that is hugely important to us. Folks who make the culture of their business a big part of how they present themselves is something that would matter to me. It can become performative in a way, like it can very quickly become disingenuous. So I think you need to be on the lookout for that. So yeah, like to make a long answer longer, yeah, it should be, but I don't think it's true to say that's always the case. Like we work with companies that have, I don't know, 20,000 employees. Like, are there some horrible people there? Probably, but it's difficult for us to know.
Yes.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one is about the bad and the don't. Are you like 100% successful at these, or this is something that you're trying to achieve? Are you breaking your own rules, or it's something that?
So yes, we do break our own rules. That's why I would sort of say they are guidelines, not hard and fast rules. Again, I would sort of say the honoring the reality of the situation. So for example, we outsource visual effects, right? Like we would absolutely rather hire visual effects artists to do real-time visual effects in Unreal. We simply were not able to do that on a pace that allowed us to ship our games. We outsource that. There's an amazing team we work with, and it's like that's very successful. But if I had the option to hire those people, I would in a heartbeat. So there are situations where we break those rules in order to sort of honor the reality of the situation. But I think the most important thing is to A, be honest about the fact that you're violating those rules, and B, have different levels of risk analysis. Like for example, if you want to demo some new piece of software, and it's going to be installed in like 3 people's machines, and it's going to make their lives a little bit easier. Yeah, you have to review the terms of service, and yeah, you gotta be careful about it, but like the amount of review is wildly different than this is something that's gonna be integral to our ability to do like player login. Like that piece of software is gonna get way more review than something that is potentially just living off on somebody's desk. So we actually have like for example, our software review process, which is partially owned by ExDev, that's the first razor. Is like, is this going into one of our products or not? And that's the first sort of stream that changes the amount of due diligence that we're actually doing.
Okay. Thank you. And my second question is, prior to be acquired, did you plan on growing, or this is something that you were kind of imposed to after the acquisition? Because
absolutely planned on it.
Most likely, maybe you didn't want to grow, like just keep doing the things you were doing with the size you were, but just maybe with more security and capacity.
Yeah, for sure. So the intent was always to grow. I mean, I sort of facetiously said early on that we was never supposed to get bigger than 30 people. That changed very early. That was within a year of founding. That didn't make any sense anymore. And we always wanted to grow, mostly because there's a very high veterancy rate at Phoenix Labs. There's a lot of people who've been in the games industry for a long time. And so there are folks we wanted to build teams around, which is what happened when we opened a team in Montreal and Los Angeles. It's because there was a creative force of folks. It was like, those people should make a game, and now we can finance that game. This team down in Los Angeles, they should make a game, and now we can finance it. As a venture-backed company, when we were independent, we had to build one game, get that into the public, get it profitable, take that money, and then figure out like how much of our time can we split between maintaining a live service and deving out the next one, while still honoring the promise to people that like we're never going to lay anybody off. And so yes, the plan was growth, but it's a much slower, much more measured. And I think like Dauntless rather did well. It's a successful game, but like it wasn't a money printing machine. And so if it turned out that Dauntless was monetizing in some like insane mobile level, we would have done the same thing, just independently.
Thank you.
Very welcome.